I'll ask the questions and I'll leave it with the questions. And I hope I'll get a response later. You must now, ladies and gentlemen, if you believe this, you must tell me of a right action performed or a right statement, moral statement made by a believer, such as Dr. Lennox, that I could not make myself or couldn't state myself, something that only he could do as a believer that was right and moral, and I could not do because I'm not a believer. It's nothingness. There's a lot of nothingness. So those who want to claim the credit for the something, what deity is going to claim the credit for the nothingness? And who went to all this trouble, this fantastic explosion of nothingness, these infinite spaces of depart into eternal fire, you're dust, you're nothing. If you don't have our faith, you're nothing less than nothing, you're worse, you're evil. At a certain point. To the contrary, it's recently been discovered by a very brilliant physicist, Lawrence Krauss, that in fact the rate of expansion is increasing and quite rapidly. The universe is expanding very, very fast. Very soon, if we hadn't been around at this particular point in time, there wouldn't be enough evidence left around in the red light shift for us to know that the Big Bang had ever even taken place. We're only picking that up from signals from a long time ago, which will soon be unintelligible. I'm saying soon, using billions of years as an index of time, of course, light years, if you will. Not light years, they're distances, but you know what I mean. Distances and times that are rightly called astronomical. What does this mean? It means that, though there is now something, after all, I am here, I do firmly believe, and I'm very happy to see all of you here too, especially those of you who paid for your tickets. It means that very soon there will be nothing. A lot of nothingness is headed our way. It's going to be all over quite soon. You can see it coming. Read the Lawrence Krauss Ebbinghaus stuff. It's going to explode away. It's going to fall apart. And if, that is, a couple of things don't happen sooner than that, we can already see the Andromeda Galaxy in the night sky. You can actually see it some nights without really the aid of a telescope, headed directly on collision course for our own. We have an appointment, ladies and gentlemen, with the Andromeda Galaxy. It's going to crash right into ours. There's something now. Enjoy it while you can. Nothing is coming. Whose design is that, may I inquire? Or perhaps before that, it's very possible that before any of this happens, we won't have to worry about it because our sun will simply swell up into a red dwarf, our oceans will boil, life on this planet will become extinct, and then the sun will collapse into itself and go the way that millions and millions and millions of other stars have. We can see them imploding and exploding and shooting themselves to death all over the sky as it is. Nothingness, there's a lot of nothingness. So those who want to claim the credit for the something, what deity is going to claim the credit for the nothingness? And who went to all this trouble, this fantastic explosion of nothingness, these infinite spaces of nothingness, and with the destiny of destruction written in every galaxy, in order to create this one privileged planet with this one very shivering, uncertain, vulnerable primate species on it that's only been here for 100,000 suffering years and has only been offered redemption for 2,000. Look first upon this picture and on that. Look at the absolute extraordinary scale that's proposed on the one hand and the absolutely, or not even microcosmic on the other. And I don't believe you can possibly take any claim of religion seriously here. Whatever is the explanation for this, people who say, well, since we don't know, we may as well say it's God, are simply drumming their fingers. They're wasting their time and they're trying to waste yours. Now, on this question of who's boss and why I don't think the Eternal Father idea is a good one. I'm sure I'm not the only father here. I have 3 children. My job as a father is to get out of their way, is to do my best for them and then make room for them. What if I was to say to them, oh, don't worry, I'll always be here. Not as in, I'll always be here for you, as in, I'm never going away. You'll never see the back of me. You'll never get to say goodbye, Daddy. No, I'll always be here. In fact, I'll be here long after you've died. In fact, I'm rather looking forward to that, because then I can sit in judgment on you. This is not even a benevolent form of despotism, is it? When you allow yourself to think about it. It's somewhat worse than I was saying before about the way that religion makes people first be terribly abject and then terribly solipsistic and arrogant and conceited. If it were true that all these things are attributable to an eternal Father who is unknowable except by those who claim, as Dr. Lennox does, sources of information denied to me and many other people, what would it mean at the minimum? It would mean we were living under an unalterable, unchallengeable dictatorship, which might or might not be benign. We've no assurance it would be benign. In my view, benign dictatorships are the worst, but that's another story. It would mean we were subjected to everlasting, round-the-clock surveillance, waking and sleeping. We would never have a private moment. Everything we did and thought would be known and supervised and invigilated and either rewarded or punished. Even Big Brother in George Orwell's 1984 couldn't be absolutely sure what all his subjects were thinking. But there was the crime of thought crime. You could be charged with it. Under the divine dispensation, no problem. You're convicted of thought crime before you've even had the thought, because everything is knowable. And how would the God who convicted you know? Because he'd already created you full of dirt and sin and wickedness. That's part of the design. And the horror of it, the fascistic element of it, is this. You're created sick, and then you're ordered to be well. So you're created full of dirty thoughts and wickedness and wrong ambitions and impure and foul nature, and then you're told, you better cure yourself pretty fast, otherwise I won't be answerable for the consequences. This is the worst imaginable kind of unfreedom, and I have to say I distrust those who wish that it were true. In my opinion, the original emancipation, the first emancipation that humans must undergo is the freeing of themselves from this man-made and mind-forged manacle. It might be asked, why don't I want it to be true? Why don't I wish it to be true? Well, I'll tell you, because once you admit that this despot exists, you will find yourself in the real world, in the here and now, subjected to the rule of man-made power, purely man-made power, ruled by other primates and other mammals who claim the right to do anything they want with you because they have God on their side and because their rule is divine. This is not a theoretical danger. I'll illustrate it in a different way if you like, and take up Dr. Lennox's point about the origins of morality. If you think that we wouldn't know right from wrong, we'd have no concept of good and evil, or the right action or the wrong action, or the right thought or the wrong thought, if we didn't have the permission of a supernatural celestial dictator, if that's where our ideas of good and evil come from, then let me ask two questions of you. First, okay, I'll ask the questions and I'll leave it with the questions, and I hope I'll get a response later. You must now, ladies and gentlemen, if you believe this, you must tell me of a right action performed or a right statement, moral statement made by a believer, such as Dr. Lennox, that I could not make myself or couldn't state myself, something that only he could do as a believer that was right and moral, and I could not do because I'm not a believer. I've asked this question in a lot of places now and to a lot of people, including senior bishops and archbishops and others. I have not yet had an answer to it, and there must be a good answer if they are to make the claim that faith licenses morality.
When you look at what we know from science, Hitchens is absolutely right to question the idea that the universe was made for us. The observable universe is over 90 billion light-years across, and more than 99.9999999% of it is completely uninhabitable, either too hot, too cold, or too empty for life. Earth is a tiny, fragile speck, and humanity has only been around for about 0.004% of Earth's history. Physicists like Lawrence Krauss and Sean Carroll point out that the universe is headed for heat death. The sun will expand and wipe out all life here long before the Andromeda Galaxy collides with the Milky Way. That's not a setup that looks intentional or compassionate. It looks like indifference on a cosmic scale. And when people claim that a divine creator designed this whole system for our benefit, it really doesn't line up with the facts. A system built to destroy itself isn't one you'd call designed, at least not designed for us. Let's hear Lennox's response.
He mentioned in his initial speech that the idea of the Creator had been completely refuted by the question, you must ask who created the Creator, and you get into an infinite regress. I discussed that with Richard Dawkins in my debate in Oxford. If you have to ask the question, who created the Creator, that means you believe in a created God. And created gods are a delusion. We've known that for centuries, and we don't need to be told it. If you say who created the Creator, it means also that you cannot conceive of anything that's eternal. And I don't know what Mr. Hitchens' views on the universe are, or in mass energy, but the incapacity to believe in eternal is essentially the issue. My final point on that would be this. I said to Richard Dawkins, I can ask you the same question, because you believe that the universe created you. So I would like to know who created your Creator, but he doesn't seem to have an answer to that. Now then you referred to the universe and its expansion and collapse from the beginning to the end. And you said, what's the point of the whole thing? I would agree with you if I believed that the universe was a permanent phenomenon. But one of the things I understand from the New Testament is that the universe never was meant to be a permanent phenomenon, but is a stepping stage. I cannot go into what the Bible has to say about the notion of new heavens and a new earth, but I would simply want to say that this is something that is very clear in the Bible itself, which claims that the universe will end up in a massive heat death. This is something not new with science. And the point is that God is going to have a new manifestation. And that is why his plans are much bigger than we see watching. Because the relationship with God is not something that's forced. It's a real relationship of love. We've been given freedom. I heard a real caricature of the biblical story in saying that God had created us sick. God made a perfect world, ladies and gentlemen. But he made us in his image with the capacity of real freedom and real choice. So that if we say no to God, God will honor that choice. I wonder what Mr. Hitchens would want God to do with people that say no to him. He seems to have difficulty with the idea that God will honor the choice of those that say no. Why is that? Because God hates them and is some cosmic tyrant? Of course not. It's because God actually loves them. Now, these things are sometimes hard to grasp because there are so many distortions of God around in the world. And that's why, again and again, I come back to look at the person of Christ who reveals God to me, to look at his love and his friendship and his care. And if I ask myself the question, would I like to be in the company of that person permanently? My answer is a resounding yes. I can think of nothing more liberating and nothing more utterly magnificent that expresses the greatness of God. Now, we heard a challenge from Mr. Hitchens that he throws out all over the place. Can we think of a right action that can be made only by a Christian and not by an atheist? It's actually a very subtly interesting question to me, because there are certain presuppositions behind it that I'd like to briefly deal with in closing. One is this. From where I sit, ladies and gentlemen, whether a person is an atheist or a Christian or anything else, they are made in the image of God, and therefore they are moral beings. Therefore they're capable of seeing good and doing good. And sometimes my atheist friends could put me to shame. So there is that basic moral compass, which makes Mr. Hitchens' question a little bit beside the point. But if I were going to answer his question directly, I'm not convinced that William Wilberforce would have liberated slavery as he did if his motivation had been atheism. Because I noticed that Wilberforce liberated slaves only to have slavery reintroduced by Nazi Germany and communism in the 20th century. There is no guarantee, ladies and gentlemen, that the abolition of God will mean the abolition of the captivity of man. But my final answer to his question is this: can I name a good action that no atheist could do? Yes, I can. I can name one that no person of whatever worldview could do, and that is to give his life for the sins of the world. It is that characterized Jesus Christ as the one who was God, and that is unparalleled in its majesty and in its confirmation that God is truly great.
Lennox tries to dodge Hitchens' challenge by redefining God as eternal, but that's not an answer, it's a label. Saying God is eternal doesn't explain how that works. It just pushes the mystery back a step. Philosophers and cosmologists have pointed out that invoking an uncreated being to explain existence doesn't solve the problem. It removes it from investigation. It's not an explanation, it's a conversation stopper. He also claims the universe was never meant to be permanent, yet bases that on religious texts, not evidence. But modern cosmology doesn't support a designed, purposeful universe. The heat death, the vast lifelessness of space, and the destructive forces built into stars and galaxies point to a system that unfolds by natural laws, not divine plans. And when Lennox talks about morality, he avoids Hitchens' real point: that morality exists outside of religion. Saying Christians can be moral isn't the argument. Hitchens is asking for a moral act only a believer could do. Lennox doesn't answer that. Instead, he appeals to Jesus' sacrifice, something based on belief, not a universally provable or replicable moral action. So the question remains: can religion claim moral authority if it can't offer anything unique or exclusive? Let's hear one more time how Hitchens responds to that, and what he has to say about Lennox's attempt to defend it.
There is, whether you are a materialist or a supernaturalist, no particular reason to say that human life has any enormous innate value. After all, religion disposes of people in heaps and mounds and says, go out, we depart into eternal fire, you're dust, you're nothing. If you don't have our faith, you're nothing less than nothing, you're worse, or evil, wicked, so forth. So it's not as if by assuming a God, you suddenly find that life is all worthwhile after all. If it was that simple, we wouldn't have to be having this discussion. I think this, essentially, I ask myself, why do I care? Why do I care not just about myself and my children, but why do I think I often care in general? Well, if I didn't, I wouldn't belong to a species that would have got this far. It may sound a platitudinous answer, but I think there's some force to it. If we didn't have human solidarity, if we didn't realize that we are brothers and sisters one with another, that we have responsibilities, duties to one another, that these are not merely reciprocal in evolutionary terms, in other words, you be nice to me, I'll look out for you, but that they can involve real ties, real bonds of affection, friendship, even love. If we didn't know that we were able to think like that, and we exempt a quite large minority of humans who are born without this, the sociopaths and psychopaths, who I suppose we have to concede are also made in God's image, if you accept that tautology, it leaves nothing really unexplained. That would tell us why we had warm feelings for one another, and also explain why we were here instead of having joined the species that went, all the other ones, that went out of business, under the same divine supervision, I might add, including humanoid species like the Cro-Magnons and the Neanderthals, who it's quite clear buried each other.
What Hitchens says about morality is backed by real research. Studies in evolutionary biology and neuroscience show that moral behavior, like empathy, cooperation, and fairness, existed long before organized religion. Frans de Waal documented this in primates. Chimpanzees comfort the distressed, reconcile after fights, and even share food. These traits evolved because they helped social species survive. Genetic studies have shown that oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, plays a key role in human empathy and trust. This isn't theology, it's chemistry. We care about each other because we're wired to. Without this, we wouldn't have built families, societies, or civilization. And he's right that religion often divides. history shows mass violence justified by faith. The Crusades, the Inquisition, ISIS, and even colonial genocide, all done in God's name. So belief doesn't guarantee morality. In fact, secular countries like Sweden, Norway, and Japan consistently rank among the highest in well-being, education, and ethical behavior, all without high levels of religious belief. So Hitchens' claim is clear. Morality isn't granted by a god. It's part of our nature, shaped by evolution and society. Let's think about that. Do we really need religion to be good? Or have we been moral all along?
You made a statement a couple of months ago that I found very interesting. And I don't claim to understand it, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot with it. You said that you were a cultural Christian. Okay, and so that raised a number of questions in my mind. And the first question was,
You are changing the subject.
No, I'm not. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I may be leaping outside of the topic a bit to get back to it.
We can do cultural Christianity, but I think I have a list of questions that you wanted to ask, and that is one of them. But I think Professor Dawkins did ask you...
You were referring to the predictive power and to the utility of the stories.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's actually what I was trying to zero in on.
Go ahead.
Okay, so that was the point. Well, it seemed to me that your proclamation that you were a cultural Christian was a recognition and a statement that you had found something in the culture that had been derived from Christianity that you had an affinity with, and that there's some reason for that. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is, well, what do you think that Christianity got right that allows you to make a statement like that? I mean, I know that there's differences perhaps in what we both think about the ultimate veracity of the biblical stories. Maybe there isn't differences. Like, it would take a lot of conversation to figure this out. But what did you mean by that? Like, what do you think that Christianity got right that would enable you to make a statement like that?
Virtually nothing. I meant by that no more than that I'm brought up in a Christian culture. I went to Christian schools. I therefore know my way around the Bible. I know my way around the Book of Common Prayer. I know the hymns. That's all. I don't value Christianity as a truth system at all.
Okay, so let me ask you about that, because maybe that's true and perhaps it's not. So the first question is, like, do you think that there are any marked differences between cultural traditions that would enable you to rank order them in terms of their ethical validity?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so for example, we could contrast mainstream UK Christianity with Islamic fundamentalism.
Yes.
Okay, so there's a hierarchy.
There is a hierarchy.
Okay, a hierarchy that points to what?
Well, in the case of Islam, I dislike any religion which punishes apostasy with death, that throws gay people off high buildings, that practices clitoridectomy. That seems to me to place Islam on a lower level than Christianity, but that's not to say anything very positive about Christianity.
Well, it might be to say something positive about Christianity. Like, I think that question is open, because you might ask yourself, what did Christianity get right that led it away from those particular presumptions and towards something that you regard as more ethically appropriate? Like, this isn't a trivial question.
It's a very modest claim. There's not very much. I mean, to be better than a religion that throws gay people off high buildings is not really a very virtuous achievement.
I don't know. I don't know if that's true, because if you look at the barbarism that characterizes the human past, you might think that any progression whatsoever towards something approximating mercy and tolerance is nothing short of a bloody miracle.
Well,
like, people are pretty ruthless, and so are our chimpanzee cousins.
Yes, they are.
Right. So,
yes.
So we move forward into the light with great difficulty.
Yes,
and
yes.
The fact that we can take that for granted now, and that it seems self-evident and deserving of faint praise, it's not so clear to me that that's a reasonable proposition.
Okay, let's grant the faint praise, but that has nothing to do with the truth value, and what I care about is the truth value. I see no truth value in the claims of Christianity, the virgin birth, the resurrection, the miracles. Do you believe in any of those? Do you believe Jesus was born a virgin?
As I said before, there are elements of the text that I don't feel qualified to comment on. My experience has been that the more, I know from a metaphorical perspective and from a mythic perspective what the story of the virgin birth means, and I accept that. I know, for example, that any culture that doesn't hold the image of the woman and infant sacred dies. And I don't know how that needs to be expressed in a form.
Is it true, though?
Do you mean that you don't know?
Well,
Dawkins is making an evidence-based argument. Christianity as a belief system doesn't hold up to scrutiny. There's no empirical evidence for the virgin birth, resurrection, or miracles. None of these claims meet the standards of historical verification. For example, Bart Ehrman, a respected New Testament scholar, points out that the Gospels were written decades after Jesus' death by anonymous authors, full of contradictions and theological bias. That's not reliable evidence, it's religious tradition. When Peterson talks about holding the mother and child sacred, he shifts to metaphor. But metaphors don't prove anything. They might feel meaningful, but they're not evidence for a god, a virgin birth, or divinity. Dawkins stays focused on truth. Peterson avoids the question entirely. When Dawkins is asked something, he gives a clear answer. When Peterson is asked, he deflects. That's why Dawkins calls it out. Maybe Peterson doesn't actually believe these things and doesn't want to admit it. And the idea that Christianity led us toward mercy and tolerance? History doesn't support that. The Inquisition, witch trials, slavery justified by scripture, and opposition to women's rights and science all came from dominant Christian cultures. Progress came in spite of religion, not because of it. Led by secular thinkers like Voltaire, Thomas Paine, Bertrand Russell, and modern human rights advocates. Dawkins is right to say, cultural familiarity doesn't mean truth, and religious comfort doesn't equal evidence. Let's continue watching.
Let me ask you about that, because truth, this is something I talked with Sam Harris about too. Truth, as we know, is a tricky business. Do you think there are differences in the truth claims between different writers of fiction? Like, is Dostoevsky more profound than...
No, well, I wouldn't call fiction truth claims anyway. I mean, these are...
Then on what grounds do we rank order the fiction in terms of quality? Like, Dostoevsky is a profound purveyor of fiction on the philosophical front, unbelievably deep and profound.
Yes,
There's something true about what he's writing about.
It's nothing to do with the truth that science is concerned with. The truth of science is the truth that gets us to the moon. I mean, this is nothing to do with whether one writer of fiction has a sort of insight into human nature. That goes without saying. I accept that.
Okay, so how do we deal with the notion that on the purely factual side, how do we deal with the idea, let's take you talked about clitoridectomy, let's talk about the oppression of women.
Yes.
We make a scientific case that that's inappropriate? Or is it a case that we're making on some other grounds? Like I see in the Judeo-Christian tradition, one of the earliest pronouncements is that both men and women carry the image of God, both. And that sets a certain tone to everything that follows. And it is a remarkable proclamation given its radical age, that both men and women carry the image of God and are to be treated as something with intrinsic value outside of the domain of power and politics. And it isn't obvious to me, having thought about this a lot, how we deal with that in the pure realm of fact. Because one of the facts is, if I can oppress you, why the hell shouldn't I?
Yeah, my job is to keep things on track here. I think there are a number of questions which Professor Dawkins has asked quite directly that we still haven't really heard an answer for.
Okay.
And Professor Dawkins asking about the virgin birth. You started talking about metaphor, you started talking about myth. I think anybody listening to this conversation will understand that maybe a society that doesn't believe in the virgin birth won't work. Maybe that's the predictive power that you're talking about. But I think you must understand that when Professor Dawkins is asking you, do you believe that Jesus was born of a virgin? He means something like a biological fact. And by the way, saying I don't know, or saying, I'm not qualified to comment, is an answer to that question, but is that your answer, that you don't know?
I said earlier, and I would hold to this, is that there are elements of the text that I don't know that I'm incapable of fully accounting for. I can't account for what the fundamental reality and significance of the notion of the resurrection is. My knowledge just ends.
Sure, but
I know that whatever happened whatever happened as a consequence of the origination and the promotion of the Christian story was powerful enough to bring Rome to its knees and demolish the pagan enterprise. So there's some power in that story that's remarkable.
Let's stick to the virgin birth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, well, the virgin birth results from a mistranslation of Isaiah. You know that.
Like these sorts of questions, what would you say? They don't strike me as, they're not getting to the point.
I know
the
that.
story
I know
has
you
a
think
purpose.
that. Yes.
Well, and look, I understand that there's perfect reasons to debate this. I know that, and I know that your question is more than valid, but it's beside the issue as far as I'm concerned, and it's partly because, well, when we started this conversation, I said, for example, that it appears to be the case that a description of the structure through which we see the world is a story. We see the world through a story. And so that's a remarkable thing. That's a remarkable discovery, and it's emerged probably in the last 60 years in multiple disciplines, because we have to prioritize our facts. And so we prioritize them according to a particular pattern. And there are patterns that seem to work and to propagate themselves properly and to orient cultures towards life abundant. And there are other patterns, the pattern of Cain, for example, that lead to absolute bloody devastation. And I don't know exactly how to construe that sort of truth. But we talked about the oppression of women, for example. It's like, how do you make a case on purely factual grounds that women should be treated as equals?
It's a moral question, and
I know that's exactly.
And I was dealing with a factual question, which is, did Jesus have a father? And you won't answer it.
Well,
It's a
Jesus
different
had an
kind of
earthly
question.
father and a heavenly father, like almost all mythological heroes.
So he wasn't born of a virgin then? So you're saying that Jesus was not born of a virgin?
I said, first of all, that I don't know how to mediate the fact-value dichotomy in that case. I said the same thing about the resurrection.
It's not a value. It's a simple fact. I mean, did a man have intercourse with Mary and produce Jesus? That's a factual question.
Dawkins asked a simple question. Was Jesus born of a virgin? Peterson danced around it for minutes without answering. That's exactly the problem Dawkins is pointing out. If the core claims of Christianity can't be answered as facts, they collapse under basic scrutiny. The virgin birth isn't just unverified, it's based on a mistranslation. The original Hebrew word in Isaiah 7:14 is alma, which means young woman, not virgin. The Greek Septuagint mistranslated it as parthenos, meaning virgin, and that error made its way into the Gospels. Scholars like Bart Ehrman and Geza Vermes confirm this. It's not controversial, it's academic consensus. Peterson tries to say these stories are powerful because they moved culture, but power doesn't prove truth. Islam, communism, and Nazi ideology also moved millions. That doesn't make them true. He also claims Christianity elevated women. But the Bible repeatedly treats women as property. Exodus 21, Deuteronomy 22, and even Paul's letters instruct women to submit. The real progress for women came through secular law, civil rights movements, and feminist philosophy, not scripture. And when Dawkins asks again, did Jesus have a human father? Peterson still won't say. That's why Dawkins is right. If the answers don't hold up when plainly asked, then the claims don't deserve to be treated as truth. Let's keep watching.
It's not a value question.
You must understand what you're being asked here, that even if you think that, say, the author of the biblical texts intended much more significance than a simple scientific analysis of events, Professor Dawkins is interested in scientific truth. That's the kind of truth that he's interested in. And even if you think it's irrelevant to the point of what the gospel authors were getting at, that first needs to be clarified before you can then begin actually uncovering what the stories are about. So I think Professor Dawkins is asking from a scientific perspective, and maybe you think that that scientific approach is wrong, but if you just take it for a moment, maybe this is how we find out that it is wrong. Let's take a scientific approach, ask the question, did this occur?
I think that it's inappropriate to use a question like that to attempt to undermine the validity of the entire, what would you say, deep mythological enterprise.
Well, suppose we weren't doing that. Suppose we were asking out of interest. Suppose that we were all here devout Christians, maybe even Jungian Christians, and we thought, this is interesting, over dinner. Do you think it really happened, like scientifically? Would your answer just be, I don't know?
Yes.
And you wouldn't consider it, I mean, it's not an inappropriate question to ask, just on a point of interest.
Right.
Did this really occur? And I think so often people are asking you that, and especially given the context of this conversation, we've heard everything that you're saying about metaphor and myth, but because the question is still then being asked, did it really happen? You know that that's what you're being asked. And the way you just so easily said yes, I wonder why you struggle to do that in so many other circumstances.
I think because I don't look at the situation the same. The way that Dr. Dawkins and I look at the situation are really quite different, and at many, many, many levels. You know, so even on the meme question, for example, you know, like, I know the literature on the history of religious ideas. I see how these ideas have battled across millennia in a manner that is very reminiscent to me of the same sort of claim that Dr. Dawkins is putting forward with regards to meme. I know that literature. Dr. Dawkins doesn't know that literature. And it's very difficult for me to communicate from within the confines of that literature because it's extensive and deep. And we're dealing with things that we don't understand the relationship between metaphoric truth and value predicated truth and factual truth. We don't understand that. It's a big problem. There's no evidence whatsoever from the scientific perspective that we can orient ourselves in the world merely in consequence of the facts.
Sure.
And that's a fact. And it's a fact that's been detailed out in great detail in the last 60 years by people from a variety of different disciplines. We have to prioritize the facts. That's a value hierarchy. There may be true and false ways of prioritizing facts, but you can't determine the truth or falsehood of the way that you prioritize facts by making reference to the facts. That's a big problem.
Okay, let's talk about that as perhaps a slight detour here, because I think we do need to come back to this Christ resurrection thing. But Professor Dawkins, would you say that underlying the scientific enterprise is a fundamentally unscientific assumption? You can make scientific investigations in the world, but in order to do so, you need to choose what to prioritize. You need to choose what to investigate. You also need to value the truth. You need to have a value and a motivation for doing it in the first place. Those kinds of things cannot themselves be scientifically justified. And so does the scientific enterprise have an unscientific assumption of the space?
I suppose it does. I mean, I think that maybe just be Jordan and Richard, but by the way, I think that Jordan prioritizes myth and I prioritize fact. And I think myth is kind of vaguely interesting, but it's not the be-all and end-all of my life. I think it's somewhat secondary to scientific fact, the sort of facts that tell us how old the universe is, how old the world is, the history of life, the engineering achievements of landing a spacecraft on a comet. These are the things that science can do. And as I said, the predictions of quantum theory, to come back to that, the predictions of quantum theory, which are verified to a sufficient number of decimal places that it's equivalent to predicting the width of North America to one hair's breadth. Now, that is, however difficult quantum theory is to understand, that is what you can get from quantum theory. Now, the mysteries of the Bible, if they are mysteries, aren't in the same league. I mean, they just don't cut it.
Peterson keeps dodging a basic question. Did the virgin birth or resurrection happen as a fact? He talks about myth, metaphor, and the power of stories, but that's not the issue. Dawkins is asking for evidence, not symbolism. Peterson claims truth can't just be about facts, but that's not how we build reliable knowledge. Science is based on observation, testing, and replication, and it works. We can date the Earth to 4.54 billion years with radiometric dating. We can trace the evolution of life through fossils and DNA. And we can land probes on comets using quantum calculations accurate to fractions of a nanometer. That's truth we can build on. Compare that to the Bible. No evidence for a global flood, no external confirmation of the Exodus, and no verifiable proof of a virgin birth or resurrection. These aren't mysteries. They're claims made without evidence. Peterson wants to treat myth as equal to science, but stories are not substitutes for facts. And when Peterson says Dawkins doesn't understand religious literature, that doesn't change the problem. Truth claims require evidence, not familiarity with ancient texts. Dawkins is right. prioritizing facts over comforting myths is how we make progress. What do you think? Should society lean on ancient stories, or should we demand truth backed by real evidence?
Is it nonetheless possible for an atheist to say, a proclaimed atheist to say, as I do, proclaim myself to be, that God positively can be said not to exist? No. It's a very common misunderstanding about my fraternity, sorority. I'll just take a moment to clear it up. The atheist says, no persuasive argument for the existence of God has ever been advanced or adduced without convincing rebuttal. That no argument in favor stands or has been found to stand the test of argument and evidence. We cannot say that we know that there could be no such entity. Among other things, we are too reverent of the extraordinary time of discovery, innovation, pushing back of the frontiers of knowledge and understanding that's taken place just in our own time to make any such remark. But by saying this, we say, I think, quite a lot. There is no valid or coherent or consistent argument that would not work, if it comes to that, for the existence of any God. Now, I notice it was by a slight work of elision, a bit of tap dancing there, that Dr. Turek went from being a deist to a theist, and then from being a theist to a Christian. Now, I know he does not believe in the existence of the sun god Ra. I'm practically certain he doesn't believe in the existence of Zeus. If you'll pick up a copy of my Portable Atheist, a selection of the finest writings by non-believers down the years, and just turn to the 3 pages where Mencken, H.L. Mencken, lists the easiest to name 3,000 gods that used to be worshipped and that no longer are held to exist by anybody, you'll spare me the trouble of reading them out. No, he thinks he doesn't just know, Dr. Turek, that there is a God, he knows which one is the right one. From a potentially infinite list, actually from a list that's as long as the number of people there are or have ever been in the human species, because if you ever argue with a theist or a deist, as I do every day, you'll find they all believe in a God of their very own. Indeed, they often say a personal God. Indeed, they often say a personal savior. So out of what are we reifying a concept that applies to all of us? Out of nothing but wish thinking and nonsense and fear and ignorance, and above all, and I'm not quitting on this point, servility. Everyone in this room is an atheist. Everyone can name a God in which they do not believe. Let them advance the case that the one in which they believe is the superior one.
Hitchens is pointing out something that holds up historically and philosophically. Over centuries, people have proposed arguments for a God: the cosmological argument, design argument, moral argument, but none of them have held under critical examination. For example, David Hume challenged the design argument back in the 1700s, saying complexity in nature doesn't automatically mean a designer. Today, the multiverse theory offers a scientific explanation for fine-tuning without needing a supernatural cause. He also brings up the thousands of gods humans have worshipped. That's backed by history. There are over 3,000 documented deities from cultures all over the world. Believers today reject almost all of them. So when someone says their God is the true one, they're making the same move atheists make, just with one exception. That's not reasoned evidence. It's cultural inheritance or personal conviction. And to just make it simple, everyone can be an atheist because we already don't believe in most gods. We all have something we believe in, but belief alone isn't the same as truth.
Now, the same tap dancing hopes you will not notice that deism and theism are two quite different things. The deist argument says that there is so much order apparent in nature and in the cosmos and in the universe that it might be unwise to assume that such order has no one interested in ordering or designing it. That assumption might be an unsafe one. The philosopher Paley, in his Natural Theology, said design implies a designer. He came up with the very famous image of the watch. If you come across a watch, if you're a primitive tribesperson in the Sahara, you may not know what it's for, but you know that it's not a rock or a vegetable. You know it has a purpose, and someone made it that way. Until quite recently, that was the default position of most intelligent people, including Mr. Jefferson, who, despite his intermittent atheism, in my judgment, was a
deist. I'm so sorry, was a deist. He would debate with, among the many skills he had, was a very advanced level of paleontology. He would debate with the greatest paleontologist of his time, the Count de Buffon. How comes it, how can it be that we find seashells so high on the mountains of Virginia? How can this be? Not even the most intelligent people of that day, and it's very recent, it's an instant in historical time, had any idea how that could be. There isn't anyone in this room who wasn't educated and brought up knowing exactly how that is. It's just a shame that Jefferson and many other intelligent and humane and well-educated, literate people just couldn't see that far. He wasn't to know, though Darwin was born in his day, on the same day, actually in 1809 as Abraham Lincoln, the very same day, the two great emancipators, Darwin being, in my judgment, the greater of the two. Now we know this proposition to be true, the proposition that was ridiculed so pathetically, I have to say, I thought, by Dr. Torrey. There is no explanation for the origins of our species, for the origins of our cosmos, for the origins of our globe itself. There is not one explanation left which requires the existence of a deus ex machina. In every case, we have a better or sufficient explanation. I think that assertion of mine will stand any challenge this evening. I'm looking forward to hearing some more of them. Of course, Darwin used creationist images. He actually set out to vindicate Paley's theology. He thought he could do it by his taxonomical study of nature. Einstein used God images when he spoke of the extraordinary majesty of the cosmos. It's in us. It's in our vocabulary. It's hardwired in us, you might almost say, to use images of awe-inspiring, godly, Mozartian, you might say, or even Shakespearean images when talking about these things. But when we come down to the actual analysis of them, we find that we don't need the prime mover at all, and that most of the prime mover explanations, if not all of them, have been positively misleading. So that the deist may propose a designer, and I may not be able to show you convincingly that there could be no such person, but the theist has all their work still ahead of them. From this designer, how do we get to the designer who answers prayers? Did you hear a thing? I mean, just a phrase, even an implication, even a suggestion from anything my opponent said, that you could, by an argument from design, prove answered prayers, or prove that someone born of a virgin was therefore the son of a god, or could prove that resurrections occur, and that by people being tortured to death thousands of years ago, we are now redeemed, that we are vicariously forgiven our own offenses by human sacrifice? How does deism help you to that? It doesn't. It quite simply doesn't and cannot. And the attempt to build from one to the other is a conjuring trick of a very vulgar, I think, kind.
Hitchens is right to call out the jump from deism to theism. Deism only says there might be a creator behind the universe's order. Theism adds layers: answered prayers, miracles, virgin births, resurrections. That leap has never been backed by evidence. The design argument he critiques, Paley's watchmaker analogy, was seriously challenged by Darwin's theory of natural selection, which explains biological complexity without needing a designer. Today, we have overwhelming support from genetics, fossil records, and observed evolution in labs. The watchmaker argument doesn't hold when we understand how nature builds complexity over time. Hitchens also mentioned Jefferson's confusion about seashells in the mountains. Now we know that's due to plate tectonics and marine sediment uplift, fully explained by modern geology. What used to be a mystery no longer needs supernatural answers. And about Einstein, he spoke of God as a metaphor. He said, "I do not believe in a personal God, and I have never denied this." His views were closer to Spinoza's pantheism, not traditional theism. In short, every gap once used to justify God, from life's origin to Earth's features, now has natural explanations. And no part of deism leads to claims like human sacrifice for redemption. There's no evidence connecting the two. Let's hear Frank Turek's rebuttal.
I want to point out that most of what Christopher just said there is pretty much complaints about religion and religious people and has no impact on whether or not God exists. Religious people can be the worst people that ever lived. That says nothing about whether or not God exists. People can do evil. That doesn't mean the parents don't exist. Children can do evil. Doesn't mean the parents don't exist. My kids do evil, but I'm still here. I do evil. My dad's still here. In fact, he's sitting right there. What does that prove about whether or not God exists? Let me try and go down some of the things Christopher said. Yes, I am an atheist when it comes to Zeus. But Zeus is not spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator that I hopefully, at least I thought I gave evidence for. And maybe Christopher will come back to my statements on that later. I don't believe in Zeus because I don't think there's any evidence for Zeus, but I think there's evidence for the theistic God. Deism, I didn't make the direct shift to theism. I probably should have been more explicit. I think it's obvious there's a theistic God because life came several billion years after the creation. That is not a deistic concept, that is a theistic concept. I didn't say anything about Christianity. Even though I am a Christian, I don't have time to defend Christianity here. I'd love to debate Christopher on the issue of Christianity in the future, and I'll publicly offer that right now. If he wants to debate whether or not the New Testament documents are reliable and tell us really what happened about what Jesus came and said and did, I'd be happy to do it. But when I mentioned before, I have a couple arguments on the bench. I've got almost a full baseball team of arguments here. I've got a couple arguments on the bench. It's the resurrection is one of them, and I don't have time to get to that here. So I'm not backing up the Christian God here. I'm backing up a theistic God, even though personally I do believe in a Christian God. He claimed Darwin was the great emancipator, and that he went on to talk about atrocities, and I think he again missed my point. As I said before, I'm not saying atheists can't be moral. Christopher, what he says in his book again, much of it is true. Religious people have done awful things. In fact, Christianity predicts we'll be hypocrites. That's what the church is. It's full of hypocrites. Whenever somebody says, I don't want to go to church, there's too many hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal, we got room for one more. That's what the church is. We're all fallen. We're all sinners. That's why we need a Savior, because we can't do it. And Christopher said, well, how can you command somebody to be well when they have no capacity to be well? Well, we were well in the beginning, and I'm going into Christian theology here, I understand. I'll just try and answer the point. We were well in the beginning, but then we messed up, and so God, the great physician, came back to save us. That's Christian theology. As again, I don't have time to support it. I'm just pointing out that is the theology. Now, Christopher talked about atrocities, but again, on the atheistic worldview, here's the main point. How do you define what an atrocity is? Who defines it? Who has the authority to define what an atrocity is? The carbon atom? The benzene molecule?
Turek claims Hitchens is just complaining about religion. That's not true. Hitchens is pointing out that religious claims like prayer, miracles, virgin births have no evidence. That's a valid challenge, not a complaint. Turek says his God is different from Zeus because it's spaceless and timeless. Those are just descriptions. There's no testable evidence for any of that. You can describe a unicorn as invisible and eternal. It doesn't make it real. He argues life began billions of years after the Big Bang, and that proves a theistic God. That's just a timeline. Astrophysics explains it naturally. No God needed. Turek brings up morality and says atheists can't justify it. That's false. Morality is rooted in evolution and social behavior. We see it in animals, cooperation, empathy, fairness. These traits evolved because they help groups survive. He asks where reason, math, and consciousness come from. Neuroscience studies consciousness. Math is a tool we invented to describe the world. These aren't mysteries that require a God. Turek quotes scientists like Crick, but Crick never said God was the answer. He said the origin of life is complex and still being studied. That's not proof of design. It's honest science. And DNA, it's chemical, not coded by a mind. Self-replicating molecules can emerge through natural processes. There's no evidence that intelligence is required. Everything Turek mentioned either has a natural explanation or is still being explored. None of it proves a theistic God.
I'm not saying you have to believe in God to be moral. I'm not saying that only religious people are moral. I'm not saying atheists can't be moral. I'm not saying atheists don't know morality. I'm saying there's no way to justify what is right and what is wrong unless there's some authority that provides it. What is the authority? In a materialistic worldview, there is no authority. The carbon atom has no moral authority over you. And it seems that Christopher goes on and on about how he does not want to be under some kind of divine totalitarianism. That is a moral rejection of God. Where does he come up with this immoral totalitarianism? His worldview does not afford immorality, because his worldview does not afford morality. He has to borrow from the Christian worldview in order to argue against it. In fact, he has to sit in God's lap to slap his face. Where does he get morality from? Where does he get reason from? Where does he get mathematics from? Where does he get consciousness from? Where does the universe... He said there are explanations for where the universe came from. Atheistic, I'd love to hear them. I haven't heard one yet. How does something come from nothing with extreme fine-tuning? What is the explanation for that? He said there are arguments for the beginning of life that are naturalistic, not according to the people who are studying the matter. How about Francis Crick? If I can find his quote here. Francis Crick said, "Every time I write a paper on the origin of life, I swear I'll never write another one because there's too much speculation running after too few facts." Mark Kirshner of Harvard and John C. Gerhardt of Berkeley said, "Everything about evolution before the bacteria-like life forms is sheer conjecture." Biochemist Klaus Doss admits that after more than 30 years of research into the origin of life has led to, quote, "a better perception of the immensity of the problem of the origin of life on Earth rather than its solution. At present, all discussions on the principal theories and experiments in the field either end in stalemate or in a confession of ignorance." Now, I'm not saying that this is a default position, that it must be God. I'm not saying that I just lack a natural explanation for the origin of life. I'm saying that specified complexity, information, the DNA structure that we all have is evidence for an intelligent being. Because information only comes from minds. The laws of ink and paper did not create, God is not great. There was a mind behind it that brought it into existence. And there's a mind behind DNA. What is the atheistic explanation for DNA? What is the atheistic explanation for information? What is the atheistic explanation for all of these 9 things I mentioned? How much time do I have? I have none. Survey said, sit down. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Well, I think I'll just invite Dr. Torek to do the following. Make available to us on a sheet of paper, which I'm sure he has, the thesaurus of quotations that he's found from this and that scientists and physicists and natural scientists and so forth. And you will find, when you read them, when you look at them, I was writing them down as you went through them, all of these are statements of uncertainty. All of them. They're statements of all we know is how little we know. That's been for many years my definition of an educated person. Someone who knows enough to know how ignorant they are. It actually is it's not my own original definition, it comes from the Greek, but it's the only definition that works. And no one working, toiling in the field of science could possibly say anything less or more of themselves, especially at a time like this. But there you have it right away. The theistic and the deistic explanation has to be based on a certainty that there is a supervising and, if you want to be a theist, a caring and intervening creator who manages these matters. And there hasn't been a single sentence.
So who made the stronger case, Hitchens or Turek? Let us know in the comments. Like and subscribe for more clear fact-based breakdowns of debates that matter.